Let me ask you a question. How good are you at change? How comfortable are you at letting go of what's not working and moving on? I'm not talking about small changes, painless changes that are clumsy, but no big deal. I'm talking about big change, necessary change, life-altering change like job or career changes, relationship changes, breaking up with someone or getting a divorce or quitting a job, moving. Who here likes moving? I've moved so many times from one city to another, one apartment to another, one house to another. What a pain. I believe that's why change is so hard. It's disruptive. Would you agree? It messes everything up. And it usually involves pain, mental and emotional, and sometimes physical pain. Change is hard and it often hurts. I know from experience, my life has been one change after another. And while I'm pretty good with change, to the point of even initiating change when things get too cozy, I get it. Change is clumsy for most people. It's something to be avoided if possible. That's why I think stories about change are so important. They help people see change in another light, give it another perspective, another way to frame it. Instead of being something to avoid or fear, our stories of change, well, they can help people, if not embrace change, but at least take the sting out of it, so they can move forward and make the changes they need to make. Welcome to episode 9 of the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life 20-minute podcast. I'm your host and story coach, Doug Stevenson. If you're just dropping into this podcast series for the first time, I'm going to suggest that you go back and listen to the previous episodes in sequence. There's a lot of good foundational content about my story theater method and how it works that will make this and every episode more valuable. Okay, back to stories of change. I remember one time, many years ago, I was delivering a speech on change, the positive power of change, to an audience of about 150 people. And there's one story I tell about my struggles with relationships, having successful relationships. I couldn't make a relationship last. I was bad at it. And how I had this list. You know the list, the one where you make a list of the criteria you have for the kind of person you want to be with, the kind of relationship you want to have. Well, my list was based on some really dumb criteria that I probably thought was cool when I was 13. And how I'd come to realize over time, like over 20 years, and one failed and painful relationship and heartbreak after another, that my list was crap. It was just junk and it was holding me back. And that if I wanted different results to find my one true love, that I'd have to throw out my list. But there was one thing on my list I wasn't willing to let go of, and that was kids. Because you see, the thing is, by the time I decided to throw out my list, I was 40 years old. I know it took me forever, right? But I really wanted to have kids. That was the deal breaker. Well, as the story goes, I meet Deborah. Oh my gosh, Deborah. And she was the one. You know what I mean? The one, but not like any of the other ones that I thought were the one. No, she really was my soulmate, my true love. Everything about this relationship with Deborah was different, but she already had her 2 boys and she wasn't interested in having any more kids. So she said, I understand that you want to have kids and I honor that. And you should have that. If that's what you want, you should have that, but we can just be friends. Bummer. And after agonizing about this for months, many, many months, and over that time falling more and more in love with Deborah, I made the excruciating decision to let go of having kids, my own kids. And Deborah and I got married, and I got my kids. I mean, they were her kids, Michael and Bennett. Michael was 13 and Bennett was 9. And it turned out to be the best thing, the right thing. But in order to have what I always wanted in a relationship, I had to let go of my list and everything I was holding on to that was holding me back from finding true and lasting love. Well, Deborah and I have been married for 28 years. And we now have 4 wonderful grandchildren to boot. So I end this story by asking my audience, what are you holding on to that is holding you back? Let go. Well, the speech went great, but afterwards there were some people gathered around, and there was this one lady in the audience who came up to me after my speech. And it was obvious that she'd been crying. She had a hanky in her hand. And she said to me with a trembling voice, "Thank you so much for your story about letting go. My husband of 42 years died 6 months ago after a long bout with cancer. And I've been holding on to him, to the grief and anger about losing him. But today I finally let go. Thank you. Thank you for your story." And with that, she gave me a really nice hug and walked away. I can still see that moment. I can still see that room and her standing there next to me at the front of the room. I can still see her and the look on her face, the tears in her eyes, those words, the change that she was able to make right then and there during my story. That was amazing. It worked. My lesson, let go. It stuck with her. So I want to ask you the same question I asked my audience that day. What are you holding on to that is holding you back from moving forward, from taking that first step or the next step, or from moving on or walking away from something or someone that no longer serves you? What are you holding on to that is holding you back? Let go. You see, when that lady came up to me and shared her story with me and how she had let go, that's why you need to develop your change story, because your story can help someone make a change that they want to make, that they know they need to make, but are having a hard time making it. They're putting it off or avoiding it because they know it's going to be hard and maybe even painful and messy. What's your change story? Whose life can you change? All right, let's talk about some of the elements of a good change story, because you know me, I always want to break it down. I want to give you instructions, something to grab onto so that you've got a process, okay? All right, here we go. There's going to be 4 steps. Number 1, it has to be a true story where you struggled to make a necessary change, where you put it off or avoided it, even though you knew you needed to make it. So that's number 1. Number 2, it has to have been real and personal for you. Not something technical or clinical or simple. The more personal and intimate, the better, because then it will be emotional. And it has to be emotional and hard, difficult. You need to have struggled with the change. It can't have been easy. Number 3, you have to have made that difficult change. And as a result, your life has changed for the better. You're glad you made it. That's essential. There has to be a happy ending. And number 4, you need a strong call to action, a phrase that pays, that tells people what the first step is, like let go. Here's an example of another change story with a strong call to action phrase that pays. Now, as I share my change story here, I want you to do something. I want you to monitor what's going on with you as I'm telling it, how you're experiencing my story, but also your story during my story, your need to change. What does my story trigger in you? Now, from an early age, I knew I wanted to be an actor. I always knew that from the earliest days, but I never had a chance to do any real acting in high school or college. The college I went to didn't even have a theater department. So in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, before I transferred to the University of Kansas, I got into an acting class in Chicago, the Ted Liss Theater Workshop, and it was unlike anything that I'd ever experienced. There I was, a pimply and naive 19-year-old kid surrounded by adults. real working actors and models in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And Ted Liss, oh man, he was this intense, no nonsense, classical method acting teacher. And from the moment I walked into the studio, it was this crowded room above an Italian restaurant that smelled like coffee and cigarettes. Oh my God, I was hooked. I was mesmerized, and I never made it back to college. That was okay, because that was it. That class was it. That's where I wanted to be. And for the next 2.5 years, I studied with Ted, doing scenes from plays and Shakespeare monologues, watching, learning, practicing week after week. I was taking it really seriously. And then I got cast in my first real play, The Merchant of Venice, and then another play, an original musical about a bunch of high school kids in the 1950s, a bunch of greasers. It was called Grease. And I was the original Danny Zuko. Really? It was 1971. It was my second play and my first musical. And oh my gosh, I was riding high. I was the male lead in the hottest show in town. And I felt like I was on the right path. It's like, yes, this is working. But only one thing wasn't working. I wasn't making any money as an actor. I was making my living driving taxi. And all the plays that I acted in were their community theater kind of plays, even Grease, which was a huge hit. We didn't get paid. The actors didn't get paid. And at that time in the early 70s, there were no movies or TV shows being shot in Chicago, just TV commercials and voiceovers. And the only actors I knew who were getting anywhere left for LA or New York. That's where the money was. So after 1.5 years of studying with Ted Liss, acting in a bunch of plays and trying to get by with a few TV commercials under my belt, I knew I had to leave Chicago, my hometown, to go to Los Angeles, Hollywood, because my dream was to act in the movies. So I made a plan to save some money, pay off my car, and when the time was right, pack my bags and go. Well, 6 months after I hatched this plan to save $1,000 and pay off the Volkswagen Bug that I was buying from my dad, and he was being very lenient with payments, my friend Susan and I were sitting in a restaurant at midnight after acting class, having a meal, when she looked at me and said, "Doug, what's the deal? You said you were going to Hollywood and you're still here. What are you doing? Are you going or what?" And I started into this spiel, which I had shared with her many, many times, about saving $1,000 and paying off my car. And she just interrupted me and said, I know. You said that 6 months ago. How much money have you saved? So I said, well, $100, maybe. Have you made any payments on the car you're buying from your dad? No. So she says to me, so when are you going to go? How long are you going to put it off? What are you waiting for? And I realized what I'm waiting for is the right time, when I have the money and can pay for the car. She leaned across the table and in a hushed voice, she said, Doug, it may never be the right time, the perfect time. You're not even close to having $1,000 or paying for your car. That's a fantasy. So here's what you're going to do. Are you listening to me? Yeah. Okay, I'm listening, Susan. Pick a date. Pick a date. Go home and get out a calendar and pick a date. Maybe 3 or 4 months from now, maybe 6 months from now. I don't care, but pick a date. And on that date, you go. You leave, no matter what, no matter how much money you have, whether without $1,000, whether without the car, on that date, you go. You make a commitment to that date and you go. Pick a date. Well, that was rough. But as I was heading home, I knew she was right. I was serious about going to LA, but I wasn't serious about taking any real steps to make it happen, like saving money. I was barely making enough money to pay my rent and for acting classes from my job driving a taxi. But I did what she said. I got out a calendar and I picked a date. September 15th, 1972, which was about 5 months away. And for 5 months, I really got down to it. I worked longer hours. I saved a little bit of money. And unfortunately, I had to make a deal with my dad to just give him the keys to the car back because I wasn't going to be able to make any payments. And on September 15th, 1972, I said goodbye to my parents, made my way to a freeway entrance ramp, complete with my Boy Scout Troop 886 knapsack on my back, a duffel bag full of clothes, and about $250 in my pocket. And I stuck my thumb out. That's right. I was hitchhiking to Hollywood and standing there on the side of the freeway with cars whizzing by. I was so scared. I remember, I can see it right now. I was so scared. And the cars are whizzing by, and I'm thinking, is anybody going to pick me up? How is this going to work? Oh my God, am I going to die? I had no control over what was going to happen, but I had picked a date and now I was doing it. And 6 days later, I'm not kidding you, 6 days later, after the most miraculous journey of my life across country, I was standing on the corner of Sunset and Vine in Hollywood. Oh my God, I did it. Now, what I learned from that experience is if there's a change you want to make, need to make, no, you have to make, putting it off only makes it worse. When something is bad, it doesn't get better with time. When something isn't working, it won't work out on its own. You've got to make change happen. And the way you do that is pick a date. Pick a date. Now, how about you? Is there a change that you want to make, need to make? No, you have to make, but you're putting it off, avoiding it? Come on, guys, gals, gentlemen, ladies. Try doing what I did. Get out a calendar and pick a date. Once you pick a date, things will start to happen because it will become real. Not just a someday change, a specific date change. So that's another story that I tell about change. And the thing about it that works is the phrase that pays. Pick a date. Here's the thing, the payoff. The first time I told that story was about 3 years ago. I told that story in a conference. Well, later that evening, when the conference was over and everybody was hanging out in the bar and going to dinner and everything, I was walking through the lobby of the hotel on my way to dinner. And I recognized a lady that was in my audience. She was sitting at a table by the bar with a glass of wine. And I walked over and I asked her what she thought of my session, if there was anything that stood out for her. And she looked up at me with this smile on her face and she held up her calendar. I'm not kidding. She held up her calendar and she said, Doug, I'm picking a date. Right now, I'm picking a date when I'm going to retire. We did a high five. It was a moment. I love that because my change story became her change story. My lesson was her lesson, and the lesson stuck. And it's all about what sticks, storytelling that sticks. An effective change story takes your listener on a journey. As you're sharing your story, they're experiencing the change they need to make that they're avoiding. If not right then and there, then at some point in the future, you're planting a seed for them of what change looks like and feels like and how they can make the change they need to make sooner or later. Your story opens the door and allows them to peek into their future, to see what may be possible for them when and if they make a change. And your phrase that pays, your call to action phrase like pick a date, it invites them in and tells them what they need to do. That lady took me up on my invitation. She picked the date. So once again, here are the 4 criteria for a good change story. Number 1, it has to be a true story where you struggle to make a necessary change. Number 2, it has to have been real and personal for you. The more personal and intimate, the better. Number 3, you have to have made the change. And as a result, your life has changed for the better. That's the happy ending. And number 4, you need a strong call to action. A phrase that pays, that tells people what the first step in making their change happen is. Like, let go or pick a date. What's your change story? I know you have them because you've already gone through so many changes in your life. Am I right? Pick one of those moments, one of those changes to develop into a story. Think about your audience and what they're going through. That person in your audience. Is it a personal change that they need to make? Or is it a corporate story, a change in attitude about a corporate change that's taking place? And what kind of action or process do they need to initiate to get started, to embrace change? Your change story can make a real and lasting difference in someone's life. You can get them started on the path to a better life. I know that one lesson that I learned from Susan, to pick a date all the way back in the 70s, has helped me many times in my life. And letting go, that's a lesson I've had to put into practice many times in my life. How about you? All right, well, that's it for this episode. As always, if you feel that you learned something valuable today, something practical that you can use in your business or your personal life, there are two things you can do. First, click on the subscribe or follow button. And second, share this podcast with 3 people. Put it on your social media. Let people know about it. They'll thank you for telling them about storytelling that sticks. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your comments and questions. And also, if you want help crafting your change story or any story or speech or TED Talk, send me an email at doug@dougstevenson.com. All right, well, that's it. Hope you're doing well. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.